today don't understand it. In other words, let's come back to something that I already touched on. What do you want to maximize? Do you want to maximize government? Do you want to maximize redistribution? Or do you want to maximize national income and prosperity? Remember the very first slide. The very first slide was the classical liberal vision of small government or the welfare state vision of big government and redistribution. If you follow that latter approach, if you follow the approach of a welfare state and redistribution, you can maximize the equality of outcomes. But Winston Churchill, actually I thought I had Winston Churchill's quote up here. I don't. Maybe it's on another slide. I sometimes lose track. Winston Churchill had a very good quote. He said, "The inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of the blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of the misery." That's really the choice that countries have. You can try to redistribute, and it's really dumb to redistribute before you become a rich country, but you can do it if you want to. And what you will guarantee is that everyone is equally poor, except, of course, the politicians who will make sure they skim off more than enough money for themselves. That is a route to being a poor country forever. Or you can have small government and free markets, you can become a rich country, and then if you want to make a mistake, if you want to adopt a welfare state, you can do it. France did it. They now only grow 1% a year, but at least they're already rich. Sweden did it, and they grow 2% a year, but they're already rich. Make sure you get rich first. Here's just some figures showing per capita GDP, the difference between the United States and Europe, the rich countries of Western Europe. America is 30 to 40% richer. But you know what the bad news is, from my perspective? Because of Bush and Obama being big government socialists, America is rapidly becoming Europe. I used to think it would take America 25 years to become Greece and collapse. I now worry it might be a lot faster because Bush and Obama are pushing us in that direction a lot quicker. So this shows per capita GDP. Let's go to the next slide. This shows growth rates over time. Historically, the United States has grown faster, which is kind of ironic. For those of you who have had some economics, you've probably heard of something called the convergence theory. The convergence theory, which I think is generally a good theory, says that if you have a poor country and a rich country over time, the poor country will grow faster than the rich country, and sooner or later, they'll both get richer, but they'll eventually become equally rich. But America's richer than Europe, and America's still growing faster. Why? Because Europe has a bigger, more wasteful government with higher and higher tax rates. Now, I think government's too big in America and tax rates are too high, but we're not as bad as Europe. It's sort of like the old joke, these two friends are going out camping, and they're in the woods, and all of a sudden they see coming over a hill an angry, hungry bear. And the one guy, he's putting on his sneakers, and his friend says, "What are you putting on your sneakers for? You can't outrun a bear." And he says, "Well, I don't need to outrun a bear, I just need to outrun you." And that I think is a good description of what's happening with the United States and Europe. America is getting fat and lazy and slow, but we're not as fat, as lazy, and as slow as Europe yet, but Bush and Obama are bringing us there, unfortunately. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I want to go ahead and close my presentation. I'm probably actually going over time, because I love talking about these things. I want to go ahead and give some real-world examples of the importance of good policy. Let's go to the next slide. If we go on this chart, you're not going to be able to see anything, but this chart shows, 20 post-communist economies, all the countries that emerged from the collapse of the Soviet Union, the countries of Eastern Europe, the former Soviet republics. And if you look at all these countries, you'll see that one country is doing much better than all the others. What country is that? Estonia. If you were to look at the Index of Economic Freedom or the Economic Freedom of the World Index, you will see something that shouldn't surprise you. Estonia is by far the most free market of all those countries. So you had a whole bunch of countries emerge from the collapse of communism. One country has done much better than the others. That one country did the most free market reforms. That should tell us a lesson. Here's a slide. It shows three countries. The top line is the United States. The blue line is Sweden, and the red line is Ireland. If you go back to the beginning of the slide, which is what, 25 years ago or so, I can't even see it anymore. My eyes are getting old, and you can see that the United States was the richest country. Sweden wasn't doing too bad, and Ireland was very, very poor. Remember I said earlier Ireland was the sick man of Europe. Well, Ireland, beginning in the mid-1980s, Ireland started doing all this free market reform. I already talked about their low corporate tax rate, but they did other things as well. They reduced government spending and did things like that. What's happened? Ireland started growing much, 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 much faster. And Ireland is now a richer country than Sweden. And they've done that in a very short period of time. That period of rapid growth is only about 20 years. Remember that one of those first charts I showed you, the difference between 7% growth and doubling your living standards in 10 years and 1% growth, which means it takes 70 years to double your living standards? This is sort of a real-world example. I mean, Sweden actually grows 2% a year, not 1% a year, so it's not quite that example. But Ireland shows what El Salvador could do with the right policies. Now, this is a bunch of major Latin American economies. And it's very confusing because, there's so many lines here, I can't really tell what it is I'm supposed to see. Let's take out two countries and look at them. This is Chile versus Venezuela. If you go back to 1975, Venezuela was twice as rich as Chile. Twice as rich. But the last year of data I had was 2005. So we're only talking about 30 years. Most of us in here, I think, are more than 30 years old. So in our lifetimes, that's a pretty short amount of time, in our lifetimes, Venezuela, because of bad, big government, corrupt policies, and it began before Chavez, by the way, Venezuela has fallen. Its living standards have declined, and Chile, because it put in place all these free market reforms, Chile has skyrocketed up. This is just a 30-year period. A 30-year period where one country went down and one country shot up. And I asked you, which country do you want to be? Who do you want to emulate? Who do you want to copy? The answer should be obvious. You want to copy the policies of the country that is creating more prosperity and wealth. Here's another comparative chart. It shows France, the United States, and Hong Kong. If you go back in time, Hong Kong used to be very poor. But sort of like Ireland, they have these good free market policies, actually a lot better than Ireland, and Hong Kong has shot way up. And actually Hong Kong, that data ended in 2002. If I was to extend that chart and add the data for the last 8 years, Hong Kong is getting very close to taking over the United States. And I'm going to make a prediction right here, right now. 10 years from now, Hong Kong will not only have passed France, Hong Kong will have passed the United States. Why? Because in the United States, we are making the same mistakes the French made. And we made those mistakes under Bush, we're making those mistakes under Obama. It doesn't matter what your political party is. If you expand government, if you increase the burden of government, your economy is going to grow slower. Next slide. This just looks at Ireland compared to France, because again, we want to end that we begin in 1975, we end in 2005. And really, if you just look from 1985 to 2005, just 20 years, I'm pretty sure that nobody in here is less than 20 years old. So in all of our lifetimes, we saw a dramatic change where France used to be twice as rich as Ireland, and now Ireland is much richer than France. So I ask you again, whose policies do you want to copy? Do you want to go the more free market direction of smaller government and lower tax rates, or do you want the welfare state approach? Let's go to the next slide. This shows Hong Kong versus the United Kingdom. What's interesting about this is, of course, Hong Kong used to be a British colony. Hong Kong used to be much, much poorer than England. And now Hong Kong has passed England. Again, the data ended in 2005, but today, 5 years later, Hong Kong is several $1,000s richer per capita than England. Whose policies do you want to copy? Now, I should have actually picked a different color here. You might not be able to see it. This, I think, is a chart more powerful than any of the others. Because what does this chart show? It shows that if you went back to 1930, that's when this chart begins, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world. They were the 10th richest economy in the world. In fact, they were the 10th richest economy in the world all the way up really to after World War II. Argentina was a very rich country, and Hong Kong, which is in the light blue, so you really can't see it, but Hong Kong was way down there below 50 in the world rankings. What's happened? Over time, Argentina has fallen way down. Why? Because they went in the direction of statism, of Peronism, of Chavezism, of Castroism, whatever you want to call it. They made government much, much bigger. And as a result, Argentina used to be one of the richest countries in the world. Now it's a very mediocre country, I suppose would be the fair way to say it. Whereas Hong Kong used to be a very poor country, and now they are in the top 5. They are one of the richest economies in the world. Who do you want to copy? That's really what my whole speech boils down to. We know what best practices are. We know what works around the world. Free markets and small government work. Socialism, statism, collectivism, big government, whatever you want to call it, doesn't work. I gave the quote from Winston Churchill already, that the British are good at quotes, because let me give you a Margaret Thatcher quote. Because, boy, it's come true in Greece. The problem with socialism is that sooner or later, you run out of other people's money. And really, think about what that actually means. If you keep trying to redistribute, if you keep trying to put in place welfare state policies, if you keep making government bigger and bigger and bigger, what's going to happen? Your private sector is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And more people are going to respond to incentives. And more people are going to decide, instead of working, saving, and investing, I'm going to sit at home all day and watch TV. And when you have a society where the majority of your population, and this has happened in Greece already, when the majority of your population decides that it's better to ride in the wagon instead of pulling the wagon, your society breaks down. Yeah, as Margaret Thatcher's joke became reality. They ran out of other people's money. And we are just seeing the beginning in Greece. We are just seeing the beginning. And I don't mean that just in the sense that Spain is going to default and Italy is going to default. Yes, that's going to happen. And then Germany and France 10 years after that, then the United States 10 years after that. Because yes, I think all those things unfortunately are going to happen. When I say it's just the beginning, though, what I really mean, it's just the beginning of a very dark period in history for the world. A period when instead of prosperity and tranquility, you're going to have riots, social disarray, chaos. I fear that Europe is going to go back to fascism. Because when your society is breaking down, when your economy no longer works, what happens? We all remember, unfortunately, the Weimar Republic in Germany and what it led to. When you have a breakdown in society, when government becomes so big that the entire thing falls over and collapses, bad things are going to happen. The world is a laboratory. And that laboratory shows the countries that you should copy, and it shows